Nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim Sunni science of hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited. My preliminary conclusion is there is no middle ground. And historical critical method and isnad analysis are two diametrically opposed ways of looking at early Islam and reports, and I don't find much commonality between them as of yet. Obviously in small areas here, but overall, two diametrically opposed epistemologies.
Welcome to Events and History, where we explore the origins, teachings, and historical development of Islam with a fact-based, analytical approach. In this video, Chris at the Speaker's Corner gives his reaction to Dr. Yasir Qadhi's controversial video where Qadhi questions and discredits the reliability of the Hadiths. For centuries, Muslims have considered Hadith literature, sayings and actions attributed to Muhammad, as a central pillar for interpreting the Quran and shaping Islamic law. Yet Dr. Qadhi, a respected Western Muslim scholar, openly admits that many hadiths cannot be trusted as authentic. Chris explores the significance of these statements, highlighting how they undermine the very framework of Islamic belief and practice. He contrasts Qadhi's admissions with the traditional claims about hadith authority, drawing out the theological and historical consequences. This response not only examines the cracks within Islamic scholarship but also raises pressing questions about the foundations of Islam itself. Let's watch the video together.
Nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim Sunni science of hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited.
Audio fixed. Awesome. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, we're going to be looking at a very well-known and well-respected Western scholar of Islam and what he has to say about what other academics think about the truthfulness and the reliability and the historical accuracy of the methods that Muslims use to verify their own faith. Who is this academic? For anyone who doesn't know Dr. Yasir Qadhi, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is the academic who got into quite a bit of controversy many years ago when he released the infamous Holes in the Narrative interview with a man named Muhammad Hijab, where he got to use the infamous phrase that there are holes in the narrative the Muslims like to spread on the internet through TikTok, YouTube, whatever it might be, and that the real truth is very much different. In this interview, Dr. Yasir Qadhi explains to Muhammad Hijab how it's not as easy as you might think to say that there's only one perfectly preserved Arabic Quran, and that it's a very complicated issue, and that the story that many Muslims say about how there's only one Arabic Quran, there's definitely not more than one Arabic Quran, definitely not, is, well, he phrased it as there's holes in the narrative. And I agree. And this interview went viral. Muhammad Hijab pushing Dr. Yasir Qadhi for an answer. Dr. Yasir Qadhi refused to do so, saying he wouldn't talk about this publicly. He would only talk about this with his university students because it's a very difficult topic and not one with a very clear and easy answer. Whereas Muhammad Hijab was expecting Dr. Yasir Qadhi to give this clear and simple answer and affirm something that he himself has been telling people for many years. That didn't happen. There was egg on Muhammad's face, there was egg on Dr. Yasir Qadhi's face. Everyone went home embarrassed, and the interview was taken down by both parties not long after. But Dr. Yasir Qadhi is back, and we now have Holes in the Narrative 2.0, where Dr. Yasir Qadhi gives an interview where he talks specifically in this interview about the sciences of the Hadith. And the Hadith are the collections of sayings, of narrations, supposedly of Prophet Muhammad. The Muslims draw probably the majority of their religion and how they exercise their religion from the Hadith in particular. And the idea is that you can be confident that these narrations are sound, they're reliable, they go back to Muhammad, they're not forgeries, they're not lies, they're not accounts that don't actually go back to something someone actually said in history. No, they're historically reliable. This is what Muslims will tell you, particularly Muslim da'is, who are evangelizing Islam on the internet. But Dr. Yasir Qadhi has a different opinion. Dr. Yasir Qadhi knows his stuff. So let's watch the video.
My preliminary conclusion is there is no middle ground. And historical critical method and isnad analysis are two diametrically opposed ways of looking at early Islam and reports, and I don't find much commonality between them as of yet. Obviously in small areas, yeah, but overall, two diametrically opposed epistemologies.
Dr. Yasir Qadhi is doing an interview with a YouTube channel I actually watch and enjoy very much of their content. They approach the intellectual side of Islam, and they have different scholars from different backgrounds talk about different issues pertaining to Islam. I think they do a great job, and I very much enjoy their content. And I will put a link down below to the channel just to give them a shout out. And if I don't, and there's no link down below, leave a comment telling me I forgot to put a link. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is explaining how there are two different ways of coming to know if Muhammad said something, ultimately, right? So the hadiths are supposedly the sayings and actions of Muhammad that are preserved. And they go back and back. It's a bit sort of like my granddad, his friend's dad's uncle's friend's granddad's granddad said something, and because we have a chain of all these people, it's therefore reliable, and we can confidently know that this goes back to whoever it was that we say it goes back to. Most people, I think, will probably notice there's a lot of problems with that. You can't verify any of these people in this chain because they're already dead, so you don't have any way of knowing if it's true or not, and you can't verify it. It also doesn't really prove that the person said it, it just proves that at best people think they said it near around the time that they lived, which is another problem. But Dr. Yasir Qadhi is comparing this to what we use in the more secular academic world when we want to establish something's historicity, which is the historical critical method. This does not use later sources that have a long chain of people going back. Rather, this would use things like manuscript evidence, or it would use epigraphal evidence or orthographical evidence in terms of how things are written, the style of writing, for example. And he's contrasting these two different approaches, and he's saying there's very little overlap. They are very distinct, very unique. They don't meet in the middle. Let's keep watching.
That having been said, therefore, one will have to navigate the religious side of things if you are a believing Sunni, Hadith believer, in a different epistemology, and when you are arguing in the academic world, you'll have to use a different epistemology.
When you're arguing in the academic world, you have to use a different epistemology. In other words, you're going to have to use the historical critical method because no one in academia is going to take you seriously if you use the traditional Sunni Islamic method for establishing the reliability of the hadith of Muhammad's actions and sayings. Ouch. That is telling. That is very, very telling. Now, I knew this for a while, and I know a lot of you probably knew this for a while, but here we have a respected scholar, Dr. Yasir Qadhi, telling it out loud and openly saying that this is the case.
So in some areas, there's good, healthy overlap. In some areas, we'll politely agree to disagree. And in some areas, they're diametrically opposed. This is my preliminary analysis, and I would love to be proven wrong. And I would love for somebody to come and say, no, you are absolutely incorrect, and we can prove hadith via the historical critical method, and this is how we do it. And I would literally thank that person and be the first to buy the book and love to see it. As of yet, though, I'm a little bit pessimistic, and I don't see there to be much of a commonality. So we're going to have to simply say, if you believe in that the Sunnah has been preserved via the Hadith, you're going to have to follow a certain epistemology, a certain paradigm. And if you are, like, as you're aware, and you're an academic channel, right? You're well aware, nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim Sunni science of Hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited. I'm just...
Whoa. Take it back a few steps there, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. I think you said something very profound and really interesting that I, for one, hoped more Sunni Muslims would hear and take note of. Let's rewind that and play that again.
Like, as you're aware, and you're an academic channel, right? You're well aware, nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim Sunni science of Hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited. I'm just...
Nobody in the academy affirms the Sunni science of Hadith. Nobody. Nada. Nisht. No. Nothing at all. Nobody affirms this. The only people that are going to use that approach are people who are already Muslims, because when you step out of that paradigm, you realize there are a ton of holes with it, and you realize that academia has much better tools to establish the historicity of certain events and certain sayings of people historically. This is why I don't see much of a point in using hadith, because there's just so many reasons why you can't verify them, or in a lot of instances you can't falsify them. If you can't verify that a particular saying or a particular hadith actually was said by Muhammad, there is no point to it. It is just hearsay. I don't mean for this to be interpreted as me saying everything the hadiths say is wrong, because that's the problem. I don't know if it is. I have no idea if it's true, if it's wrong, if it's fabricated, if it's lies, if it's misunderstood, if it was lost in translation. And even if I do get to a certain hadith that I think I can be fairly sure about, there are probably variants of the hadith. So which variant is the correct variant of the hadith? You end up with the same problem when you're trying to establish direct quoted speech, because supposedly that's what it is, and not only of Muhammad, often it's direct quoted speech of Allah with Hadith Qudsi. So even with these, there's no way of establishing with any good degree of probability that it was actually said. The best you can do is you can maybe have an argument that people around Muhammad believed he said this at some point. But of course, when you accept that, then Sunni Islam is in serious trouble, because some of the most disturbing narrations that were ever said about Muhammad were supposedly said by his own companions. There are 50 different rawiyah, at least one of whom meets the standard for being a sahih narration, that goes back to the companions of Muhammad believing that Muhammad recited satanic verses in Surah An-Najm, Surah 53. Now, I don't even know if that actually happened, because I can't know. The hadith just aren't a reliable source of information. But given there's so many of them, and they predate the science of hadith movement, where they tried to categorize into authentic, good, Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, it predates that. Which, guess what? According to the historical critical method, means it's probably more reliable, because any hadith that has very early origins, and we know it's early because the majority of these are classed as weak, because if they don't meet the later developed standards, probably means they were early. And if they're early, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That meets one of the core standards for the historical critical method. We have early, independent attestation that Muhammad supposedly revealed satanic verses in the Qur'an. Verses that didn't come from God, they came from Shaitan. And there are even Muslim scholars that say this. So we have, before orthodoxy, the Satanic Verses in Early Islam by Dr. Shahab Ahmed. He wrote a whole book on this, and he's a Muslim, and he concludes, yes, the companions probably did believe this as an actual story. Does he believe that Satan actually gave satanic revelations to him? No. He actually believes that the early companions saw this from a totally different paradigm. They were thinking that Muhammad is kind of like a superhero who goes through challenges and conquers those challenges by having Satan give him satanic revelation. He then falls for it, but then he has a redeeming moment where the angel Gabriel comes to him, tells him it was satanic, and then he repents, and from that moment on, it doesn't happen again. That's the view of Dr. Shahab Ahmed in this book. That's how he explains the fact that there are over 50 different rawiyah of the companions that are early saying this. The narrations here meet the historical critical approach that Dr. Yasir Qadhi says academia overwhelmingly supports. The Islamic approach, only Muslims. Only Muslims who are already in the faith are going to accept that as being a potential way of coming to know historical truth with any kind of probability. Let's finish watching this video.
I'm just being factual. I'm describing. I'm not, saying which one is right or wrong. I'm just saying the max you'll get, like Harold Motsky and others are going to say, well, we can say that some hadith definitely go back to some tabi'un. That's like the max you can say. As for definitively stating that the hadith go back to the Prophet ﷺ, at this stage of my life, I will have to say, this is what I say as a believer, not as an academic.
Ooh, did you hear that? At this stage in his life, he's going to have to say that the hadith going back to Muhammad is something he says as a believer, not as an academic. Powerful words, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Keep in mind, I've actually read Dr. Yasir Qadhi's book, An Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran, and it's actually a really good book. I would highly recommend people, both Christian, Muslim and otherwise buy this and read it, because he actually gives a really well written introduction into the sciences of the Quran, and the Hadith are obviously one of the sciences of the Quran. Move this from one bookshelf to another, and I really hope that bookshelf doesn't collapse. Okay. Now for the rest of the video, Dr. Yasir Qadhi talks about the Quran and how he's a lot more confident with the Quran, and how we know what the Uthmanic text is, and we can be pretty sure using the historical critical approach there was a Uthmanic text at some point. But when it comes to Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, these big collections of sayings and actions of Muhammad, a huge part in the Sunni religion. Sunni Muslims will say you have the Quran and you have the Sunnah. If 50% of that is in doubt, I think that's quite substantial, and I think that's worth noting, like Dr. Yasir Qadhi has noted here. We can contrast this with Christianity, which doesn't have the idea of we have scripture, like Muslims have the Quran and we have the biblical text. And then there's this other corpus of material which developed over a long period of time, went through some kind of canonization process, probably about 150 years after Muhammad, which then led to the Hadith after that point, because it was graded, tended to be seen as more reliable than the Hadith before it, which wasn't graded because they didn't grade them back then in the early period. So you end up with a very arbitrary approach to trying to figure out what Muhammad actually said and did, and what he definitely did not do and did not say. Rather, for us as Christians, the biography of Jesus' life, what he said and what he did, is recorded by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. So for us, we don't need to go to other material to get what Jesus said and did. The importance of his ministry and what he intended to do in his ministry is completed fully in the biblical text. We don't need to go elsewhere to demonstrate his resurrection, crucifixion, ascension, baptism, birth, incarnation, and so on. That theology is already established in the biblical text. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you liked this quick video. I found this video very revealing. One thing I do appreciate about Dr. Yasir Qadhi is he does speak his mind, and he does try and merge the gap between Western academia and sort of more traditional Sunni Orthodox Islamic academia, and he speaks about such things very directly. I appreciate that. But God bless you all, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care.
Chris has highlighted just how significant Dr. Yasir Qadhi's comments on the Hadith truly are. By admitting that many of these traditions are unreliable, Qadhi has struck at one of the central pillars of Islam. The Hadiths are not just supplementary texts, they form the basis for Sharia law, daily practices, and the very interpretation of the Quran itself. If their reliability is questioned, then the authority of Islamic teaching as a whole is called into doubt. Even the existence of the Prophet himself may be in doubt, or at least, he may not have said what they attributed to him. Chris emphasized that this is not simply a matter of scholarly debate, but one that has profound implications for Muslims worldwide. For centuries, the Hadiths have been presented as trustworthy and binding, yet now even leading Muslim voices acknowledge their fragility. This raises unavoidable questions. If the foundations are unstable, how can Muslims trust what it teaches? Ultimately, truth must be pursued honestly, wherever the evidence leads.